Order. End of question time. Ministerial statement. Minister for Culture, Community and Youth.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I thank all members of the public and members of this House who have shown a keen interest in the government's move to take over the Sports Hub and have filed various parliamentary questions. My ministerial statement today will address the 25 oral and written questions that were filed for the parliamentary sittings in July. Sir, the Sports Hub we see today is a fully integrated sports, entertainment, lifestyle hub across a 35-hectare site in Kallang. It is anchored by the National Stadium and the Singapore Indoor Stadium with a range of indoor and outdoor sports and retail facilities in the surroundings. It has been in operation since 2014 and was designed, built, financed and operated by Sports Hub Private Limited, SHPL, under a public-private partnership or PPP agreement that was signed between SHPL and SportSG in 2010. Over the last 12 to 18 months, we spent some time closely evaluating the performance of the Sports Hub project, including its performance in the pre-COVID period. With a view to assessing if we should continue with the partnership, we took a holistic, long-term look at the changing environment in the sporting, lifestyle, and also entertainment ecosystem in Singapore, and what we wanted to achieve in our sporting and social policy outcomes. In our assessment, the interests of Singapore and Singaporeans would be better served by the government taking over the ownership and management of the Sports Hub instead of carrying on with the PPP arrangement. A main consideration was our desire to bring stronger community participation and activities to the Sports Hub. Once we reached that view, a detailed financial, legal, and operational due diligence was carried out with the support of external consultants and advisors to satisfy ourselves that taking over the Sports Hub would indeed be a viable option. Thereafter, we engaged with SHPL to inform them of our decision and work through the details of the handover. SportSG formally served notice to terminate the Sports Hub PPP with SHPL on 10th of June 2022 and reached a mutual agreement with SHPL over the termination and the process of the handover. On 9th of December 2022, a few months from now, SportSG will assume full ownership and management of the Sports Hub and begin a new chapter for the Sports Hub. Sir, in my statement today, I will address the range of issues raised in the various parliamentary questions that members have filed. I will organize my response along the following lines. First, set out the historical and contextual reasons leading to the development of the Sports Hub via PPP. I will explain why we chose a PPP model for this case. Second, explain the changed environment and the reasons which led to the termination of the partnership, as well as the details around the termination, including the financial information. Finally, I will touch on what we envisage for the community and Singapore following the change of ownership and management of Sports Hub. Sir, by way of background, let me begin by briefly sketching out some key points in the history of the Sports Hub. Prior to the development of the Sports Hub, the former National Stadium stood in the same location. This was officially opened in 1973, hosted its first major event in September that year, the 7th Southeast Asian Peninsular Games, the SEAP Games. It was a place where major national sports and entertainment events were held, such as the Malaysia Cup, which members I'm sure will recall, where the stadium echoed with the Kallang Roar, and concerts by global stars like Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Bon Jovi, Mariah Carey. Not sure it's all our generation, but I'm sure you recall. It also hosted 18 National Day parades before the last in 2007. In 2001, the Singapore Sporting Report set out how the former National Stadium, whilst one of the best in Southeast Asia when it was first built, had become quite inadequate to support our ambitions to stage major sporting events of international or world repute. The report recommended that the National Stadium be redeveloped into a multi-use sports hub with top-tier infrastructural facilities for both sporting as well as lifestyle and entertainment activities. This would give us a world-class venue that would compete with the world's best in attracting major sporting and entertainment events into Singapore. This would in turn also help in the larger development of our sports and lifestyle entertainment industries. Following the report, the government commissioned an in-depth feasibility study. It then announced plans in 2003 for the redevelopment of the former National Stadium into the sports hub that we see today to achieve the outcomes stated in the Sporting Singapore report. The sports hub was to be a new, best-in-class international stadium envisioned to bring our sports, social, and lifestyle offerings to the next level and position Singapore as a leading venue for local, regional, and international events. With this in mind, the government had to decide on the best way to design, finance, build, and operate the sports hub. Broadly, there were two options available to us at that point in time. And first, the traditional procurement method. Under this model, the government fully finances the upfront capital investment for the project and thereafter either pays a service provider to run the project or does it on its own. The government will also bear the costs and risk of undertaking the project from the start, including the design and construction, and in also getting suitable parties to come in to operate the project. Alternatively, a public-private partnership model. Under this arrangement, the government could tap into current international private sector expertise, particularly where the project was innovative, cutting-edge, as the sports hub was intended to be. A suitable partner would fully undertake the design, the construction, as well as the financing of the operations and management of the project, and thus, in this way, also directly bears the risk. The government would not have to incur any upfront capital costs or financial outlay until the project was completed or operational. Thereafter, the government would then commit a steady stream of payments to the private sector partner for the entire duration of the project term. Given the unprecedented scale and complexity of such a major sports infrastructure project in Singapore and the limitations at that time of not having sufficient depth and breadth of such expertise in Singapore, including in the private sector, we chose to adopt the PPP model. These reasons have previously been fully explained in this House, but let me briefly emphasize a few points in relation to the choice of the PPP model for this project to address the various questions raised by honourable members. First, as I said earlier, the PPP approach allowed us to benefit from the expertise of major international private sector partners with worldwide experience. This, to us, was an important consideration. The sports hub development as an integrated sports, entertainment, lifestyle hub was to be the first of its kind in the region. In terms of infrastructure, it was to be a new, innovative, forward-looking, world-class sports facility that was intended to be configured for different events, be it sports, entertainment, or lifestyle. And as a global events venue, it had to be able to attract live entertainment events from all over the world, as well as provide a first-class spectatorship experience. So we have to remember that when we first started exploring this was in 2003, or close to 20 years ago. At that time, neither the government nor our local sporting nor lifestyle entertainment industries had at that time sufficiently matured and developed depth of experience, networks, contacts in bringing in marquee sports and entertainment events from all over the world. Thus, besides needing to tap on market-leading experts with not only the right technical expertise to build the infrastructure, we also needed the experience and connections of someone with international sporting and entertainment networks. Based on our assessment, SHPL was chosen as a PPP partner because each of the consortium members of SHPL brought with them substantial expertise that was relevant to certain key aspects of the project. For instance, Infrared Capital Partners for project financing, Dragage Singapore to design and build the project, Cushman & Wakefield for the subsequent facilities management, and Spectra for the venue operations. At the same time, we also wanted to ensure that our partners would have skin in the game. The PPP model was useful for this because it allowed risks to be shared with the private sector in two material ways. And I would illustrate this by outlining the terms of our own PPP with SHPL. First, as I mentioned earlier, there is no upfront cost to the government. The entire project design, planning, and construction were borne by the PPP partners from the time the project started in 2010. The government did not pay any of the upfront construction costs at all. The entire sum, an amount in excess of 1.3 billion, was borne by the consortium upfront, and they took out a loan to finance this cost. The government only started paying the annual availability fee at 193.7 million per year, subject to inflation and other benchmarking adjustments, when the project was ready and operational in 2014. Under the terms of the agreement, this was to be paid to SHPL every year until 2035, which is the end of the project agreement period. These annual payments go towards SHPL's debt service repayments for the loan they took out to finance the sports hub construction, as well as day-to-day maintenance and operations of the asset. These are payments which we would have had to make should the government chosen to undertake the project on our own. These payments were also subject to and moderated by SHPL's achievement of a broad and comprehensive range of KPIs, key performance indicators, which were set out expressly in the project agreement. These KPIs included the availability of sports hub facilities and performance of services such as events and activity programming, infrastructural maintenance, cleanliness, estate management, security, and so on. Overall, having no upfront costs for government turned out to be useful, for instance, when the global financial crisis in 2008 hit unexpectedly. As the government's fiscal resources were not tied up, we were able to use those resources to meet other pressing economic and other needs. Second, this structure also allowed the government to mitigate the sometimes unexpected risk of such a major project undertaking. In fact, these risks did come to bear. For instance, the project encountered construction delays, for which SHPL underwrote the cost. SHPL also bore the cost of addressing defects such as the roof leaks, the inadequacy of the pitch, poor sound quality for concerts. In all of these cases, whether in delay to the project or to the cost of rectifying the project, the associated costs were borne by SHPL because under the PPP, it assumed the risk for both timing and quality. Third, the PPP structure also ensured that there will be inherent financial discipline in the project. As I explained earlier, this is a groundbreaking, novel project, and we had not undertaken this project, at least on this scale, before. It was therefore important for the government to ensure that the costs would not run away. This was achieved by ensuring that the consortium would have to bear any costs above their expectations and also return the assets back to the government at zero cost at the end of the project period in 2035. As such, this was an effective incentive built into the PPP model to ensure that they align and maintain commercial discipline and minimize the risks of any budget overruns. Finally, when considering the use of the PPP model in this case, it is also useful for members to have this in mind. This was essentially a project that had two parts: the design and building of a world-class sporting entertainment infrastructure, or the hardware, which took place at the outset, and the subsequent running operations of the project to meet sporting, lifestyle, and community aspirations spread out over about 2 decades. On the infrastructure, it is vital that we get it right from the get-go, from the start. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to change the hardware midstream or once it is built. And we needed the relevant expertise to achieve this, to get it right, build a world-class, cutting-edge facility. As to the operations and running, I've explained how the consortium's know-how and networks and connections were key to the initial periods when international marquee events were attracted to the sports hub in Singapore. But we also envisaged that there could come a time when Singapore would be ready to operate this project after it has been built, both in terms of expertise in the government and also the growth and maturity of the industry, of the broader ecosystem. And that is why, in the structure of the PPP, there is provided for a unilateral right on the part of the government, but not SHPL, to terminate the project, to take over ownership and management at any time it wanted, before the expiry of the project, with no penalty for such an early termination. This reserves to government the right to assess at any time if its interest might be better served by stepping in to run the sports hub directly, run, own, and manage directly. If so, there is an agreed mechanism upfront, right at the start of the arrangement, for such a mechanism, and there's a clear formula that defines what happens consequent upon that decision. Overall, this structure enabled the government to manage its interests through the different phases of this project, to mitigate its financial risk, to drive economic efficiency, and also align the parties, particularly in relation to the upfront design and construction of the new infrastructure. So various members have asked about the termination. Mr. Sito Ipin, Ms. Cheng Li Hui, Mr. Seo Chuan, Mr. Leong Man Wai, Mr. Lim Biao Chuan, Ms. Sylvia Lim, Ms. Herting Ru, Mr. Edward Shah, and Mr. Sharil Taha asked about the roles of SHPL and the government in the PPP and what the arrangement entailed and the ways in which SHPL had fallen short and the reasons why the government decided to terminate the PPP. Sir, there is a confluence of several reasons and not just any single one, which has led to our decision to terminate the partnership. Let me explain them. The first reason is this. The current arrangement has helped us achieve the world-class sporting infrastructure. I've explained that. But nonetheless, it still falls short of promoting sufficient community vibrancy in and around the sports hub. At present, it has been about 8 years since the sports hub first opened in 2014, though the operations of the last 2.5 years or so have been affected by the pandemic. So it's really been about 5.5 years, with another 13 years to run. When we set out, in terms of getting a world-class sporting infrastructure, I've explained that, and I think we've achieved that. When we set out to redevelop the current national stadium, the intent was to have a sports hub capable of staging major events. And through the PPP, which has worked well, we have now a world-class sports hub. It's won international accolades for its architectural design, has hosted multiple major international events, such as the International Champions Cup, HSBC Rugby Sevens, and also more in line with today's concert goers, BTS, U2, and Coldplay. Members in this House know that there were some early infrastructural problems that occurred after operations began, such as the roof, the pitch, the lights, and so on. And when these occurred, we imposed the suitable and relevant financial penalties to hold them accountable, and by and large, SHPL made efforts to work with SportSG to correct them. However, when it came to promoting and enhancing the vibrancy of community sports and lifestyle activities at the sports hub, the project did not do so well. The quality and volume of its calendar of events and programming fell short of what we had envisaged, even taking into account the private sector interest in this project. We wanted to see SHPL invest in the creation of their own new event intellectual properties and building on existing event properties, but these did not come to fruition. Apart from the Super Rugby event from 2016 to 2019, SHPL has not secured any recurring or marquee sports event at the Sports Hub on a multi-year basis. So the Sports Hub is a world-class sporting facility, and of course, international marquee events are important. But it is also an iconic national sporting asset, and there must be a strong sense of affinity and connection between Singaporeans and the Sports Hub. There ought to have been more community participation and activation around the Sports Hub. For instance, we would have liked to see the sporting community from the grassroots, from schools, junior national athletes, having more access to the Sports Hub. Hosting national school games, key events like the finals could be at the Sports Hub, or grassroots programs and activities, family days or carnivals around sporting or social objectives. These are programs for which there will not likely be any or much commercial return. But there is an intrinsic social value in realizing a young athlete's aspiration to play in the national stadium, cheered on by his or her schoolmates, or having seniors take part in a social event at our iconic stadium grounds. This is where the profit-driven model of the SHPL consortium, which had worked well in the infrastructure phase of the project, was not sufficiently aligned in the current phase of the project, where greater emphasis was needed on community programming and driving social outcomes, even if such programs did not always resonate with commercial return. Our assessment is that this would be difficult to change by just adjusting some KPIs or trying to improve the outcomes with SHPL via negotiation. We had in fact tried this for some time, but the difficulty lies in the inherent structure of the project terms. For example, SportSG had wanted to bring in ActiveSG Academy programs such as the Basketball Academy at the OCBC Arena, but encountered resistance as such programming was not revenue generating. The cost of hosting school sports events, such as combined sports days, national school games, were also high and in some cases prohibitive. Due to SHPL's exclusive subcontracting arrangement with its catering subcontractor, community event organizers that wanted to cater for its own food and drinks also had to pay high levies for doing so. These costs were then either borne by the event organizers or passed on to the participants. Accordingly, terminating the present arrangement, taking over the infrastructure on a clean break basis would allow us better flexibility and discretion in being able to drive our own policy outcomes. A number of members, Mr. Darrell David, Mr. Sito Ipin, Mr. Seah Ken Ping, Mr. Chris D'Souza, Mr. Sean Huang, Ms. Cheng Li Hui, Ms. Cheryl Chan, Ms. Poli San, Mr. Gerald Giam, and Dr. Wan Rizal asked about the government's vision and plans for the Sports Hub moving forward after we take over and how it will benefit Singaporeans. Besides what I've already outlined, let me share a few ideas which Sport SG and other agencies are already working on. As an overarching consideration, the Sports Hub will be made more accessible to Singaporeans. We want to make it a community icon that Singaporeans can identify with, feel a part of in their social and sporting activities. We are thus planning regular Sports Hub and National Stadium open houses with activities for the young and the old, and of course everyone else in between. For instance, as part of our Unleash the Raw National project, children who have joined our new Active SG football academies can also participate in the year-end football tournament at the National Stadium. We're also working with MOE to host even more national school games, such as the track and field, netball, rugby competitions, as well as the Singapore Youth Festival performances, or even some sports days for schools at the Sports Hub. Our children can then aspire to play and compete at the National Stadium, or simply come, soak in the atmosphere, cheer on their schoolmates. The plans for a National Day Parade for the next few years are not out yet, but regardless, the Sports Hub will be a place where all of us, both young and old, will be able to build treasured memories and meaningful shared experiences. Seniors from all walks of life can also participate in mass events, such as Get Active Singapore, at community spaces in and around the Sports Hub, including the 100+ Promenade, OCBC Square, and the nice space along the waterfront. We also hope to see the return of the casual stroller or jogger to the stadium by enhancing access to the stadium. Where community programs such as Active SG events and activities are concerned, we also aim to keep them affordable and accessible to all. And we will ensure that many community spaces, as many community spaces as possible are open and free for all to use. So the objectives I have set out above, enhancing sporting social outcomes and driving greater community affinity with the Sports Hub, will be complemented as well by the impending development of the Kallang precinct in our Kallang Alive plans, which aims at developing the area in and around the Sports Hub. Therefore, the second key reason for taking over the Sports Hub is to achieve greater integration with the broader Kallang Alive plans. So let me say a little bit about the Kallang Alive precinct. Kallang Alive will be an 89-hectare site along Kallang River and the Kallang Basin. For comparison, the Sports Hub is 35 hectares. So this area, the 89 includes the 35, will be about 2 odd times larger than the current Sports Hub. This area is envisaged to transform into a vibrant sports, entertainment, and lifestyle precinct by 2030. Sir, because the picture really speaks volumes, may I have your permission, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to display some slides on the LED screen?
Please do.
Thank you, sir. The Kallang Alive precinct development is at a much larger scale and magnitude, as I said, about 2.5 times that of the 35-hectare Sports Hub. This picture provides an overview of the future Kallang Alive precinct. This is what it looks like today. As part of the Kallang Alive precinct plan, there will be an expansion of sporting facilities around the Sports Hub, which will be developed, owned, and operated by Sports SG directly. And I will show members some photos of the ongoing developments. This includes the Kallang Football Hub, which will be our national training center, to be ready as soon as the end of this year. Here, we see the ongoing construction and a close-up shot of one of the turfs that is already completed, and an artist's illustration of what it would look like when fully completed. We've also started work on the Kallang Tennis Center, which will be ready by next year. Here we see the ongoing construction and an artist's illustration of what it would look like when completed. All of these that I've just shown are assets which sit outside the current Sports Hub group of assets. They are part of the Kallang Alive precinct, but not within Sports Hub. There are also other facilities, such as the Youth Hub in a longer-term pipeline with youth-centric activities. And young and youth here includes those who are young at heart as well. Beyond these sporting assets, Sport SG also plans to launch a tender for the redevelopment of the Kallang Theatre precinct into a mixed-use development comprising a multi-purpose indoor arena, office spaces to bring sport-related businesses and entities together, commercial facilities such as a hotel, and other hospitality offerings. Once ready, these entertainment and lifestyle offerings will integrate with and support the activities of the Sports Hub. These are exciting plans which we have in store for the future. But these are not our only plans. We have a vision to transform the entire Kallang Alive precinct, including the Sports Hub, into one single integrated ecosystem, which is not only capable of hosting world-class events, but also to be the home ground for our national athletes as they train and compete. We want this to be the beating heart of our community, grassroots and school sports, and a testbed and breeding ground for sports innovation and growth. Taking over ownership and management of the Sports Hub will enable Sport SG to unlock Sports Hub's full potential for Singapore, and we will integrate the Sports Hub more closely with its upcoming facilities within the precinct to deliver more seamless offerings and capture stronger precinct synergies. Members might ask, what does this integration entail and what does this mean? I'll just give a couple of illustrations. First, integration from a physical perspective, which will allow us to do more with one event. Members would have seen a glimpse of this at the recently concluded WTT Grand Smash earlier this year, where we had table tennis tables set up around the main event, which the public could use to play with family and friends whilst they waited for the elite matches. And these are matches that were taking place with some of the world's best, and we had tables around to engage the community. People come freely and play while waiting, engaging the entire community in the precinct. With the fuller integration with Kallang Alive and the upcoming facilities, we can step up on this and activate more of the Kallang precinct. For instance, we can seamlessly combine the facilities at OCBC Arena, the Singapore Indoor Stadium, and the new Kallang Tennis Centre, and can confidently bring in marquee sports events, such as an ATP 1000 sporting event. High-quality international marquee events will be complemented side by side with local programming, and we can use the entire spread, all 89 hectares of the Kallang Alive precinct, seamlessly to do so. By concurrently integrating community programming on the sidelines and in the months running up to the event, many more Singaporeans can benefit. These could include community tennis for the masses to try out the sport, tennis clinics for social competitive players, and aspiring athletes, youth competitions, and so on. So we will have a whole ecosystem of sports, our professional athletes competing in the arena, our budding young athletes training in the sidelines and in the facilities, and the general public enjoying a social game, all integrated with the other lifestyle offerings which will be coming up. It will also provide for better and dedicated experiences for participants and audiences. Second, integration from a user point of view. With different ownership structures and different commercial profit and loss, it can be incredibly challenging to achieve seamless integration in the delivery of services across the entire suite of facilities. In fact, adversarial competition between the facilities is the more likely outcome. So by taking over the Sports Hub, we will be able to give users a more integrated service experience across this entire precinct. For instance, precinct-wide promotional and marketing activities, hospitality offerings that span across multiple facilities and programming. Beyond just integrated service experiences, users are likely to enjoy cheaper costs, as Sport SG will now be able to reap precinct-wide economies of scale through shared functions and services. So overall, taking back the Sports Hub and integrating it with Kallang Alive will enable us to unlock greater value and achieve our broader social and sporting vision for the wider precinct as a whole. Finally, the third reason for taking over the Sports Hub at this time is because the wider sporting and entertainment ecosystem has since matured. I spoke a little bit about this earlier. One of the key reasons for working with SHPL and choosing them as a partner was to rely on their expertise and networks with many other networks and international players around the world. Over the years, our own sector in Singapore has grown and matured, and we are now much better placed to continue making Sports Hub a premier hub for sports and entertainment. Our own internal capabilities have grown over the past few years, Sport SG has played a key role alongside SHPL to bring in major sporting events such as the WTA Finals, Champions Cup, Rugby Sevens, and so on. And we have developed the know-how, the links, the networks, and the experience to continue doing this. Besides that, our local and locally based companies have also matured. Companies such as Unusual Limited, Live Nation, they are now much more established and can bring in larger gigs into Singapore. Group 1 Holdings and Ironman Asia have also continued to grow, introducing several flagship events that Singaporeans can identify closely with and actively participate in. Our growing capabilities and international recognition as a premier hub for sports and entertainment can be seen in major names that have set up operations in Singapore as well, such as AEG and IMG, as well as NBA, which has announced their setup of their Singapore office. Third, demand for these events have also grown. With our recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, there's now greater demand, and we see that gradually ramping up both locally and regionally for larger scale sport, lifestyle, and entertainment events. Overall, the limitations of the current arrangements, the changing environment, and our growing capabilities and ambitions are all factors that we considered when deciding on terminating the partnership. And I would add that this was not a decision taken lightly. We felt that, however, having done our due diligence, as I explained at the start, and a confluence of these factors in the ecosystem all coming together, this was now a right time for the government to exercise its right to step in, take over ownership, and continue the management of the Sports Hub. Members Edward Chia and Sharil Taha asked about the impact which the termination in this case might have on the guidelines and considerations for future PPPs. Sir, each venture, whether PPP or otherwise, has to be considered on its own merits and to consider the purposes for which you enter into the arrangement in the first place. In this case, we foresaw in this arrangement that was long-term, that circumstances could change along the way, and we provided upfront for an agreed no-fault termination without penalty in the PPP. As I've outlined above, we had good reasons to terminate the PPP with regard to the reasons I've outlined, but having reached this decision does not necessarily mean that in all other cases that the government should no longer be open to other PPP projects. Regardless of how projects are financed, we have a sound evaluation process to review the business case, the scope, the life cycle costs, implementation approach, and also the risk, the relative risk between government and private sector for each of these projects. For PPP in particular, a framework is in place to assess the suitability of undertaking the PPP, including tangible outcomes, potential for downstream life cycle cost savings, the nature of the project risks, which will differ from industry to industry and project to project, the available private sector expertise in that area relative to what government can offer, and the need for flexibility or the likelihood of downstream changes. All of these are factors to be taken into account, and I would say no two projects would be similar. This framework is continuously refined and builds on the lessons learned both here, locally, our own experience, as well as internationally elsewhere. We will therefore continue to be open to leveraging PPPs as a model where suitable. Having explained the reasons for termination, let me now turn to explain the cost of termination and how it might compare with carrying on with the PPP project till its conclusion in 2035. Members Mr. Seah Kian Ping, Mr. Sito Ipin, Mr. Edward Chia, Mr. Lim Biao Chuan, Ms. Sylvia Lim, Mr. Sharil Taha, Mr. Joshua Raj Thomas have all asked about the cost of termination. So the key questions are, how much is the government paying in total for this termination? How does it compare to what we would pay if we had continued with the partnership till 2035? And if it is different, how do we account for it? Let me address these points. To do so, let me just quickly recap a few financial points on the PPP which I raised earlier. First, the SHPL funded the full initial capital expenditure, the CAPEX, for the construction of the Sports Hub. They did so by taking out a loan. This meant that the government did not have to contribute any upfront capital for the construction in 2010. So it didn't pay upfront, and it is also now the cost of the loan for the financing of the infrastructure, the capital costs, is still being borne by SHPL. Second, the government will pay SHPL a fee of 193.7 million each year from the time the project started operations in 2014 all the way until the end of the project in 2035. Third, with this fee from the government, SHPL would then be responsible for the full operating expenditure, including daily operations, maintenance, security, life cycle costs for the entire project term. And fourth, the assets would be returned to the government at no cost in 2035. So that's the framework of the PPP. So therefore, if we had continued with the PPP arrangement, the government would continue to pay SHPL approximately 193 million each year, every year from now until 2035. And that works out from 2022 onwards to be approximately $2.32 billion. That's a committed sum under the PPP. This sum does not take into account net present value and other financial or accounting adjustments. With the termination, the government would have to pay two main buckets of cost, and let me explain them to members. The first is the amount to be paid to SHPL for the termination. This amount is made up of several components derived from the financial terms stipulated in the project agreement. I had explained earlier that this project agreement contemplated this early termination on a no-fault basis without penalties, and the agreement itself provides for the formula by which such a termination sum can be calculated. Conceptually, the single largest component, which accounts for about 1.2 billion, or slightly more than 80% of the total sum to be paid, is the capex that the government would have had to bear. In other words, the 1.2 million or billion or so of the sum that will be paid will go towards the capex. As I explained earlier, this is the capex that the government would have had to bear if it adopted the traditional procurement approach of proceeding with the sports hub on its own. The remaining components, or about 300 million, are due to the fair market value of the sports hub, which is commercially negotiated, and also other costs, expenses, and deductions based on the project agreement. At present, the sum to be paid to SHPL for termination is projected, therefore, to be around 1.5 billion. But the final amount will be based on the accounts as at the date of handover, which is December. So there could be some fluctuations and variations, but we don't expect there to be material variance from this figure. The second bucket of cost is the cost of the future running and operating of the sports hub post-handover. So for parity of consideration, let me sketch out what this cost is projected to be. I think Ms. Sylvia Lim and Mr. Sharil Taha asked about this. We will take as a benchmark the current operating assumptions and costs incurred by SHPL, which includes, as I mentioned earlier, maintenance, operations, security, future life cycle costs, replacement, programming costs, day-to-day costs, and so on, all the way until 2035, which is the comparable period. Based on this, and we use data from actual incurred, it means this is from SHPL's actual incurred, we expect to incur approximately $68 million per year doing this for operations. If we were to draw a parallel comparison against the balanced tenure of the project agreement, in other words, if you compare like for like until the end of the period in 2035, at 68 million per year for operational costs, that brings us to approximately 800 million over the balance period until 2035. If this 800 million is added to the termination sum, this makes the full projected cost at around 2.3 billion. So it's roughly the same, although I've not gone into the decimal places. The termination sum added to the projected cost of maintenance and operations is roughly comparable to what it would cost had we chosen to continue with the PPP and incurred the availability payments over the rest of the project period until 2035. So with the component figures taken at face value, and as I said, without taking into account accounting and other net present value adjustments, this aggregate sum would be comparable to the financial obligation committed under the PPP, had we chosen to continue with it. So we have carefully examined the finances to ensure proper due diligence and to ensure that we can reach a financially rational outcome when we are doing this. Taking the two buckets of costs to be paid for the termination, the sum to be paid to SHPL, which largely reflects the upfront capex and the future operating costs, this would be a fair deal for the government on which to take back the assets. None of these components are penalties to the government, as I said, because the project agreement provides for a no-fault termination. These are simply the costs that we would have had to incur or would have incurred going forward in terms of the capex and the operating expenses. So notwithstanding the financial calculations and the due diligence, as I said, it is to ensure that we reach an outcome that is financially rational. I want to make it clear that the decision to terminate the Sports Hub project was not driven by financial considerations or to save money. Indeed, we don't plan to operate the Sports Hub at status quo or on the same assumptions as SHPL. As you heard me say earlier, we want to make the Sports Hub more accessible, invite more participation, bring more people into the Sports Hub, make it more accessible. To do this, we will have to have more community programs, invest to bring more world-class events into the Sports Hub, and opening up the Sports Hub at the National Stadium to general community use. All of this would probably mean higher expenditures and increases in daily operating and maintenance costs. As such, we should probably expect our OPEX on an ongoing basis once we take over, likely to be higher than what it was previously. At the same time, however, this might be balanced off against the future revenue generated by the events and activities at the Sports Hub. Previously, under the PPP, any revenue that was generated by these commercial activities would go into the project. Now, when we run it, albeit we want to do it in a different way on different assumptions, the revenue that we generate will go back directly to mitigating and defraying the cost or any of the increased costs in maintenance. So let me be clear that even as we do this and we have these considerations, even as we want to enhance community participation at the Sports Hub and enhance our programs, we must also do it judiciously. We must still operate within financial prudence and ensure that we are not profligate in spending, that we are careful in how we spend. But taking back the Sports Hub from the private sector will also mean being able to redefine our outcomes away from being mainly or predominantly commercial in nature. We will be able to better realize our sporting and social objectives, open up the Sports Hub to more Singaporeans, and bring greater value and outcomes for us, for the future of sports in Singapore, for our athletes, and for the everyday Singaporean. Sir, members, Mr. Muhammad Fahmi, Mr. Sean Huang, Ms. Sylvia Lim asked about Sport SG's confidence and ability to take over, and how Sport SG will continue working with the private sector. The PPP project has enabled us to have a strong foundation of a world-class infrastructure. We intend to build on that and continue to bring in top-tier international sporting and entertainment events, whilst at the same time incorporating our ambition of attaining wider and better social and sporting outcomes for Singapore. To achieve this, Sport SG will incorporate a holding company to own and operate the various pieces of assets within Kallang Alive. A subsidiary of this holding company will be set up specifically to own and manage Sports Hub. This structure will enable Sport SG to focus on the Sports Hub, but also at the same time have regard to the wider Kallang Alive precinct and what could be done in those cases when the other projects that I mentioned in the Kallang Alive precinct comes on stream. Where necessary, it can be operated as a single integrated entity able to reap synergies and economies of scale across the entire suite of sporting and lifestyle assets of Kallang Alive. A team of officers from Sport SG has already been earmarked to move into the Sports Hub holding company and manage Sports Hub on a full-time basis. These are officers who have had years of experience with Sports Hub, many of them having worked alongside SHPL since the inception of the project in 2014, gaining experience and know-how along the way. These officers within Sport SG have already been functionally organized in a structure that coheres with the structure of SHPL, suited to running the Sports Hub. They have been in this position for the last few years, readying for a takeover if and when needed. Beyond the internal capabilities of Sport SG, we value the expertise and experience of existing SHPL employees and would like to retain them. All SHPL employees have been offered an opportunity to cross over into the new corporate entity and continue on this mission to make Sports Hub the center of sports in Singapore. Beyond the internal structure and resources, we intend to continue working and partnering with the best providers in the private sector in the areas of programming, broadcasts, hospitality, facilities upkeep, and management, to name a few. We will therefore continue to retain the contracting model, in other words, the model where we can subcontract and work with external parties in the private sector. This allows us to work with market-leading, optimal partners to provide the best services and facilities fit for the particular purpose in question, for a particular occasion or event. In the mid to longer term, we also intend to tap into the private sector to explore the prospects of redeveloping some parts of the Kallang Alive precinct For instance, projects such as the redevelopment of the Kallang Theatre into an integrated multi-purpose sport, entertainment, lifestyle hub, or even turn the Kallang Wave Ball into a one-stop sporting, health and wellness destination. Those are just some ideas. Overall, with Sports SG taking over, the government will be better placed to drive a synergized and coherent vision for the whole precinct and achieve internal synergies while providing more integrated offerings and programs to the public. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I wrap up my speech, let me bring us back to the very initial vision of a sporting Singapore more than 50 years ago, all the way back to the early days of our independence. Then, at that time, we had the Pesta Sukan Minggu Merdeka, or Sports Festival Week of Independence, which was an annual feature in our National Day celebrations from 1966 to the early 70s. This was an event which was not just about excellence in high-performance sports, but really sports for all as part of our culture and in our everyday life. As then Minister for Social Affairs, Encik Othman Wok, put it in his speech at the groundbreaking of the National Stadium in 1966, he says, and I quote, "Sport must be an essential feature of our way of life. The new generation will not fear stagnant thinking because they will have dynamic reflexes built into them." We must go back to that spirit and conviction to make sports an essential feature of our everyday life because of the impact it can make in our own lives and in the lives of others around us. Some of my own fondest memories growing up was the excitement of being able to play at the zone or national finals at the old National Stadium, or simply being in the stands, skipping class, supporting and cheering my friends as they competed with rival schools. It made me feel like I was part of something bigger, larger, something more. And it made me connected with my school, with my friends, and certainly with the sport in a way which I think no other way can, intangible. Sport has this immense power to bind us as one, to be hungry for more, and to strive to be the very best. And this is what our Team SG athletes embody when they compete under the Singapore flag. And it is the spirit that we want to see in every Singaporean. Together, sport can make us more resilient individuals and strengthen our sense of unity as one Singapore. At the heart of it, this next chapter of Sports Hub is about sports being a part of the life or everyday life of Singaporeans. As we close the previous chapter, let me also acknowledge SHPL for its contributions. The partnership between SHPL and Sport SG has given us a strong foundation from which we can now proceed to drive our social and sporting ambitions confidently. And we look forward to working with SHPL for the next few months to ensure a smooth handover and to welcoming SHPL employees to continue with the new corporate entity which we will set up. Even so, as we leave this partnership, as Sport SG assumes full ownership and management from December this year, the efforts towards sports for Singapore still remains a partnership. Between government and the private sector partners, we will have to continue to work to provide top-class services. We want to partner with the many community stakeholders, as I mentioned, students, young athletes, junior athletes, seniors, NSAs, and of course the many Singaporeans who will participate and make the place even more vibrant and more alive. I am certainly excited about the potential we will be unlocking as we build on what we have achieved to turn Kallang Alive into a larger, more diverse, more vibrant sporting and lifestyle hub for everyone. The Sports Hub will be a place where our students grow to be resilient as they deal with wins or losses in their school colours, where we bond with our family and friends as we enjoy running around the jogging track, participating in the community sports events, and enjoying international concerts. And we cheer our athletes on as they take on their competitors from around the world. So let us write this next chapter together to make Sports Hub our national stadium, our home ground, and a place which we can all be proud of. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.